Thank you very much. Thank you for the lovely introduction. My name, obviously, Eoghan Corry. I grew up about a mile away from the school. I trudged like the guy in the Shakespeare poem with my satchel under my arm to this school every day for 8 years. And I feel very much at home here in the heart of Ardclough. My career, just to give you a very brief summary of it, is come as a journalist. I've always wanted to be a journalist and started working as a journalist even before I left school. But my career falls into three very uneven thirds. One was as a sports writer, where I started initially in the Irish Times and then in the Sunday Tribune as I ended up as sports editor there. Then went into news and was in the Irish Press, ended up as deputy editor of the daily newspaper there. And then into travel since 2002. I've been writing full-time about travel. You're very, very welcome. And all through those stages of my career, I enjoyed travel. I got to travel enormously as a sports writer, got to travel enormously as a news writer. And the joy of what I'm doing now is I'm doing the travel at an even more intensive level. I do about 30 countries a year, and I'm away for about 240 days out of a year. But when you're not covering news, you don't get shot at, which is always a great advantage when you're travelling. I found an industry when I started covering it full time, which is grossly undercovered by the Irish media. It's quite interesting as a nation how the Aer Lingus use it in the ad. Travel is in our DNA. What Irish people do is we grow up very, very aware of everything that's happening off our island, and very aware not just of a couple of countries out there, but the intricacies, the regions, the cities. We get letters from relatives who are, in America or in the missions in Africa. So you have as I travel around the world, I find there's a level of awareness. I appreciate more the level of awareness that is of the world that we have in Ireland, and you don't find it in many other countries. The only country which travels more per head of population in Europe, and I think in the world, is Norway. And they have 4 million people, and they have this enormous wealth. They also have this awareness of what's going around the world. How does that affect everyone in the room? It affects us all, because when airlines are thinking of opening routes, when they're thinking of markets to sell holidays in, they tend to look to Ireland very quickly. We are very, very well connected. We have over 200 direct flights out of Dublin, and we have one-stop connections to almost everywhere in the world. I think the moment that became apparent was 4 years ago, when Emirates put in a connection through Dubai to Auckland. So even New Zealand, which is as conceivably as far away as you can imagine, is only 2 flights away. A lot of people in the room, and from my own generation, will remember when getting out of Ireland meant going through Heathrow and getting flights to we have such an array of direct destinations. It is amazing. We also have people who will sell holidays in different markets in Germany and Britain, looking to Ireland, not because of the size of the market, not because of our population. We've only 6.4 million people on this island of ours, but because of the spend. If you look at Ireland's population and you look at it, the number of visitors it sends into other countries, they don't bear any relationship to each other. So the point I'm making is that Irish holidaymakers have a reputation for spending, for travelling often, for staying long, and they also have something which other countries cherish. We tend not to end up in the resorts that turn up on the late night satellite channels, although there are a number of people who will do that, Benidorm, drinking cheap beer all night long. We tend to look for things that are different. We disperse better. We land in a city and we go into the unusual places, and we are more adventurous. And we appreciate culture and we appreciate language in a way that Americans, British, and Germans to a lesser extent don't have your reputation. That means everybody wants our business. If you're a consumer of anything, baked beans, and people want your business, that's a great position to be. How is that going to impact on the topic we're addressing here tonight, which is paying less to get more? It means that we're given choices and options which are way beyond anything we would have dreamed about years ago. Now, that doesn't mean that travel works in this wonderful way that we decide where to go and this would be a nice place to go on holidays this year. It never really works like that. The choice is largely made for us. It's all very well to want to go to the remotest part of Ecuador, but when you work out the cost and the logistics of getting there, there are other options that present itself. So what the notion that people choose where to go on holidays is a little bit of a misnomer. Airlines choose where we want to go on holidays. Tour operators choose where we want to go on holidays. To some extent, travel agents still choose where we want to go on holidays. That means that all of us end up in 3 or 4 very distinctive destinations because the sheer number of flights and the airlift to it means that we can get there €100 each way instead of €500 each way. 2018 is going to be a very, very interesting year for loads and loads and loads of reasons. Let's start with the new places that we go. And when you're looking for a good price for a holiday, always look for the new. Look for the route that has just been announced, hasn't been developed, and they need the first year. Michael O'Leary told me that he will not make a profit on the first year in any route. It takes that long for people to get into people's heads, and he will be prepared to write it off. That's where you'll see the €19 flights. And the new flights that it works in long haul spectacularly well as in short haul. The second thing that happens when a new route is introduced is that the people who don't fly directly to that destination, you're very welcome, those people who don't fly directly to that destination then reduce the price. If you've got a new route to Seattle, which we have this year from Aer Lingus, the traditional route to Seattle was British Airways over Heathrow or SAS over Copenhagen. These guys in the Irish market say, okay, they've got a direct flight now, we've got to have to drop our price, we're going to have to incentivize people to book with us. So while we've got very spectacular direct new flights out of Dublin this year, Seattle is really, really, really a great achievement from Aer Lingus. It came very suddenly because they got an aircraft they didn't expect to get. This is one of the advantages of what happened 3 years ago when IAG bought Aer Lingus, was that Aer Lingus' old supply line was, and Anne would well remember, you'd order an aircraft 4 or 5 years in advance, which you had to do. And it wasn't, what's coming in 2019, 2020, 2021. We know what's coming. 3 A350s are coming to Aer Lingus. But now IAG bought them. IAG could shift one of the Welling or the Iberia or the British Airways aircraft or a lease agreement and suddenly say to Stephen Flaherty of Aer Lingus, I've got 2 new A330s for you next year. And the sort of turnaround we're not used to in the aviation industry, Aer Lingus decided in November that they've opened a Seattle route. The 2 aircraft, I think, came from Qatar. That's, people in the room would be very familiar with the row. That's a family squabble, effectively, going on between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And Qatar Airways have been expanding very, very fast. They have all these aircraft. They own 10% of IAG. So suddenly Aer Lingus has 2 new A330s. If you decide on a Thursday in November to launch a service to Seattle, which is starting next May, you don't have a year to market it. You don't have time to pump it out and get everyone interested in it. So I'd expect the Seattle prices to be really, really good. The other new route from Aer Lingus going west this year is to Philadelphia. That's a fascinating one because for 10 years we've had American Airlines, originally US Airlines, but now they were subsumed by American Airlines, flying to Philadelphia. There's nothing to beat 2 competing airlines on one direct route. It's the only thing brings down price. Competition is what brings down price. So have a look at Philadelphia this year. Cathay Pacific flying to Hong Kong. That's a big deal. That starts the last week in April. We expected, for years we've been listening to people saying our first Chinese route is going to be Beijing. No, it's not. It's actually Hong Kong. I have no idea how they're going to fill a flight to Hong Kong, because there aren't the onward connections out of Hong Kong, and there isn't the inbound market that you'd expect that you would have got out of Beijing. So Cathay Pacific, Hong Kong, that's a really great new route for us. The new routes within Europe. There's also, before we leave North America, there's another very spectacular new route from Air Canada going into Montreal. We had one flight a week from Montreal for the last 4 years. We now are going to have 5. So you've got 5 times the airlift into Montreal. And Air Transat were the airline that flew to Montreal before. Very Canadian. Irish people wouldn't be very familiar with it. It's been very much in the Canadian market. The second A330 that I mentioned that Qatar Airways had, that was dropped on top of Aer Lingus, Stephen Kavanagh's head, in November, I asked him at the press conference, are we going to get another new route out of that? But what he's done with that is he's increased the size of the aircraft that's going into Washington, D.C., and he's bumped up the frequencies into New York. The Irish appetite for New York seems to know no end. We just cannot get there often enough. And the real joy of it is that with every extra service to New York, we're going to have about 12 extra services a week to New York this summer. That's a couple of thousand seats. And with every extra service that comes in, it seems to stimulate, they fill them, and it seems to stimulate more people. It just doesn't, you'd imagine the aircraft to thin out and the number of people on the flight. It hasn't. It's actually increased it because awareness has been driven. Most spectacular of all, and it's something that it's a development, a technology development. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised the things that happen in technology, like telephones and our cars and everything. The technology of aircraft has changed transatlantic out of Ireland into a short-haul experience. Aer Lingus are talking about starting 10 new services in the next 2 years, and they're talking about using the aircraft that would normally go to Spain. Instead of the wide-bodied A330s, which Aer Lingus use, they're going to use the A321neo. That the range of that aircraft can take you beyond Chicago into Milwaukee, into Wisconsin. It can take you to Philadelphia. It can take you most of the way down to Florida. So they're talking to any city in America that wants a transatlantic service. And every city in America wants a transatlantic service. They like it for prestige purposes. To give an example of how that works, out of the blue, we got a direct service to Hartford. I don't know if everyone in the room knows, Dublin to Hartford in Connecticut flies daily. It's halfway between Boston and New York. And the reason we got that is very clear. Hartford International Airport lost its transatlantic service about 6 years ago. And the guys used to call it Hartford Almost International Airport. So the Hartford guys said, we need a transatlantic service. The mayor of Hartford said, we need a transatlantic service. And Aer Lingus said, okay, well, how much is it worth to you? And they gave Aer Lingus $6 million. And Aer Lingus says, we'll have a slice of that. So they're flying daily into Hartford. The other, going back to that thing of the short haul, the Norwegian are using the same aircraft that Ryanair use. We're all familiar with them, the 737-800. Michael O'Leary's like Henry Ford. You can fly, Henry Ford said you can have any car as long as it's black. Michael O'Leary says you can fly any aircraft as long as it's a Boeing 737-800. He just buys the one aircraft all the time. But Norwegian are using that on their 2 services to North America, which they launched last year, $130 each way. You couldn't get it's sort of €130 each way. It's sort of the train to Cork if you book it at the wrong time. That's the price you're paying for it. It's an interesting service because they couldn't afford, for €130 you can't buy a slot at JFK. You can't get into JFK. So where they land is Newburgh International, Stewart International in Newburgh, upstate New York. It's on the Hudson. very, very far out of town, and it's a bit of a drama getting down to Manhattan. And when I flew out in last year, in September, the baggage was put on the check-in desk. They reversed the belt for the check-in desk, and they took all the bags up to transported them to the check-in desk at the departures area, and took the bags out and left them in the middle of the floor because they couldn't handle the landing, because all they had before was a couple of flights to Philadelphia or somewhere. But what's interesting is that is $130 each way to an airport which really is in the middle of nowhere. And we all know what happened, that passengers love that. Ryanair started flying people to airports in the middle of nowhere in the 90s. Girona was 130 kilometres away from Barcelona. They called it Barcelona, and people still flew there. Their airport in Copenhagen wasn't even in Denmark. It was in Sweden. They flew you into the next country and brought you back across the bridge. People don't mind. And the two people sitting beside me, Norwegian will charge you 130 for the ticket, they'll charge you €50 for the bag, and they'll charge you then for if you want to be fed, and then they'll charge you for anything else. The Norwegian guy I met him, I had dinner with the Norwegian team in Friday night in Belfast at the holiday show, and he said that the two things they discovered about the Irish market were they're not paying for anything. They're actually putting everything in their bag, wearing 4 jumpers, and then getting on the flight. The second thing is that they had 2 flights. They fly into Providence, which is beautiful. For Providence, Rhode Island, everybody will know, is the smallest state. I feel like one of the teachers here from the 1960s without the violence. But Rhode Island is the smallest state in America, but I didn't really appreciate how small it is. It's the size of County Clare. So you end up in Providence, this beautiful place, famous for its whaling, and it's only an hour and a half from Boston. But Providence has not been performing out of the Irish market. Newburgh, we can't get enough of. Hard to know exactly how that happened. You'll notice Newburgh's the New York season has been extended out of both Dublin and Shannon for this year. After its first year, they've tweaked the Providence one. Cork is performing very well. Cork people are really excited to get transatlantic because it really sticks in their craw that Shannon has transatlantic and Cork doesn't. But Providence isn't performing as well, but we're not getting enough of that upstate low cost into North America, which Norwegian are doing. One of the reasons, I think, which they probably didn't realise, is so many Irish Americans live up there. All the Irish in the 40s and 50s moved out of Brooklyn up to Westchester County. Some of you probably have relatives there, Rye, Pearl River, Blauvelt, all those towns up there. And they're all, so there's a big Irish American community there as well. So the 2 students from INUI Galway that were beside me on the Norwegian flight were actually landing in Newburgh. Their cousin was going to meet them, and then they were going to take 4 days down in Manhattan and come back again, and they would never have flown at €300 each way, but they were flying at €100 each way, by the way, if you buy it, this January sale. The west coast of Canada, the east coast of Canada is even nearer. The Nova Scotia WestJet, the ASL service to Nova Scotia, I flew out a year and a half ago for dinner in Halifax in Canada, a lobster dinner, and flew back the following day. It was 4.5 hours, that return flight. You wouldn't get to Tenerife. So that's what technology has done. The east coast of America is becoming a short haul, and that has it's not going to stop. I can see we have 24. We used to have 3 flights to North America, Chicago, Boston, New York, in my childhood. We now have 25 and 25 routes, and that's going to go to 40 or 50. So that's what's really happening. And bear in mind, the very most important thing I say, probably the most important thing I'll say all night, the first year of a route is the time to jump and really get what value there is, make whatever value there is to be had out of it. Asia has been a real success story for Irish holiday makers. The problem with Thailand, it's one of the greatest country in the world to go to. It's very cheap. You could play a hurling match in your hotel room in most of these hotels. Because the wages are low, you have staffing levels which are sometimes 3 or 4 staff for every guest. even at the breakfast buffet, there's someone there to help you carry your plate to the table, and incredibly cheap. You can get the TripAdvisor awards that were announced this morning. Some of you may have picked up that a hotel in Cambodia won the best hotel in the world award. The rates for that hotel in Cambodia are €88 a night. And, you pay more in the Glen Royal for, rugby match weekend or whatever. So the problem with Thailand is it's 14 hours away. But it was 2 flights. It was Dublin, London, Bangkok, Phuket, or wherever you went after Krabi. Now, what the big revolution on the Asian routes has been the Middle Eastern airlines, all of them growing like gangbusters. Dubai, we have 2 flights daily, and they've increased the capacity by 20% for summer 2018. Etihad have 2 flights daily through Abu Dhabi. Qatar have started a daily service. I thought they would have the best rates. They actually didn't reduce the prices as much as I expected. I expect that might happen in 2018 because they're finding it a bit sluggish, and the airline is in trouble as well because of the row with Saudi Arabia, that family squabble, which is a very serious threat to peace, not just there, but all across the world. And we also have 2 Turkish flights, and they're talking about going from double daily to 3 times daily over Istanbul. The big story for Istanbul is, and I'm going to talk about Turkey as a destination. I'm not talking about Turkey as a destination now. Turkey as a stopover is more important than Turkey as a destination for the Irish holiday maker in 2018. But what happens in October 2018 is that horrible overcrowded Ataturk airport is going to be closed down, and they're moving to an airport which is going to be the biggest in the world. Capacity for 120 million passengers, that's double Heathrow. Our Chicago O'Hare, which is the busiest, or Atlanta, it's double any of those individual airports, which is regarded as the 3 biggest in the world. And that means much greater ease of transfer. And I suspect that will give Dubai and Abu Dhabi a run for their money. Both of them are a bit crowded. Abu Dhabi is getting a new airport as well in the beginning of next year, 2019. So when we got all of these Gulf airlines, and Turkey won't like being called a Gulf airline, but I do always include them in this, offering the one-stop options. They're growing like gangbusters. They're adding 20 or 30 destinations a year. They're flying to over 200 airports in the case of Emirates, Qatar, and even more in the case of Turkish. Etihad are a little bit smaller, but all of them have put those regional airports in Thailand onto their map, onto their portfolio. So getting to Phuket is now a one-stop in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. It used to be 2 stops, and you had to go through Bangkok, and you have to take an internal in Thailand. Chiang Mai, Krabi, direct from the Middle East. And that's going to grow. I mean, Pattaya is got a new airport coming as well, and even though it's driving from Bangkok, the roads are terrible. People probably have done that run. That's getting direct flights in from Dubai at the end of this year. Also opens up Australia. Australia is huge for Ireland. We've such a strong connection with it in terms of language and culture and our relatives and our sporting connections, that we travel in big numbers. It's very expensive. I warn anyone who's been out there recently will find it's just getting more and more expensive, but we still get loads of it. And all of those Middle Eastern airlines don't just fly to Sydney and Melbourne. They're doing Adelaide and Brisbane as well. And Cairns is still the best way down to Cairns is not to go to Sydney and come back. It's actually to go down through Singapore, but you can't. At some stage we'll have a Dubai Cairns as well. So all of those places that were far away. My mother spent as long coming from Milltown Malbay to Dublin in the 40s on the West Clare Railway and the Limerick line as we do to get to Australia nowadays. And for people who are younger in the room, we should someday be told or have a look at what people paid in the 80s and 90s for a return flight to Australia. We were paying as much pound for euro in 80s money to get to Australia and back as you do for a business class flight now. And you can get a business class flight for under €3,000 to Australia. It's a long flight. It's never going to get any shorter, because the discovery, when the people who experimented with Concorde and all of those things discovered that the fuel burn made these things unviable. We're always going to be flying about 20 hours to Australia, but a business class is now costing the same as an economy class used to be, and especially if you snatch it at the fare. And the fare, some of the sales are still running to the end of January. That's the story with Asia. Vietnam. The other great development of the last 2-3 years in Asia has all of those extra routes, but the visa regime. And the visa regime was a heartbreaker. The reason Thailand grew so much, we send 60,000 off our island. We send 60,000 holidaymakers to Thailand every year. It's extraordinary, but the reason it was so high, and India, which is a much more interesting and bigger country, it was less than 20,000, was the Indian visa was a nightmare. It was a heartbreaker. It was just so much hassle that people went to Thailand, where you get the visa on arrival. That's been transferred to an e-visa in the last 18 months. If Sri Lanka, you had to send your passport to London. You know, they kept it for 6 days. They gave you a visa and they sent it back. That's visa on arrival now. A lot of countries have dropped the requirement for visas completely, e-visas or visas on arrival, and that's extended into the hardest, the most troublesome visa, the most difficult visa is the Russian one, and a lot of the former Soviet republics had the same regime. But I noticed this year Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan have all dropped the visa requirement for Irish people. And Russia is still a problem. You still have to go into Orwell Road to get your visa, but you can see changes in the visa regime. Vietnam is another example where it was a big hassle. You had to have a letter of invitation. That's gone to the visa regime has been just removed there. You get a visa on arrival. So Asia has been opened up by two things: the new routes and the big changes in the visa regime. Back to Europe, and where we all love to go is Europe. We go in such numbers. The Spanish figures will be released probably on Thursday of next week for the year 2018. They're on a global level. They've passed America as the second most important tourist destination in the world after France. But the figures for Ireland are going to be jaw-dropping. 2 million Irish people went to Spain in 2017. And that's off a population that's just the Republic as well. It would be 2.5 million when you put the North in as well, off a population of 6.4. It's astonishing. We have maybe 80,000 people with houses out there, and they reckon each of those is generating about 5 trips. Now, where we're going is all over the place. Like Malaga Malaga is the big entry point. It's easily the biggest entry point, but all the airports in the region, Murcia, which wouldn't have been even on the cards a couple of years ago, Alicante, all of them seeing huge growth in the number of Irish. And this is really interesting because so many Irish already went to Spain. How do you get to grow a market that's already that big by 16%, which they did last year? And then the Portuguese will be screaming over the border at me, look at us, we've done even better. They've increased the numbers even more, and the appetite for Spain is so great that the A330s, you get 280 passengers on an A330, you get 180 on a 737-800. The A330s come in from New York in the morning. They all arrive from 5 o'clock till about 10 o'clock. Everybody knows the action. There's a phrase among the taxi drivers of Ireland. You know that moment, that Valhalla moment when you've got everything you want in life. The taxi drivers at Dublin talk about the first yank. To get the first yank is what they aspire to for getting off those flights at 5 o'clock in the morning. But all these flights arrive in at between 5 and 10, and then they do a run to Malaga. And you can get your 280 passengers out, 280 passengers back, and then you're off to New York for the second run. That's how important Malaga is. We're putting our North American aircraft on that run. Santa Ponsa in Mallorca, well known to the Leaving Cert Brigade. it will have more than 4,500 Irish people in it every week in the summer of 2018. What does that make it? It makes it the size of Rathangan, really. You know, it's an Irish town, you know, that's on its own. It could actually play in the Kildare Championship, you know. It's enough population. It's what's there. So that's the scale of the appetite for Spain. And what Aer Lingus have done is put on 96,000 extra seats for the summer. And what Ryanair have done is put on 250,000 extra seats for this summer on top of what was already there. They see their flights are full. Ryanair's flights last year for July and August were 96% full. And that's a world record. Nobody's ever filled 96% of a flight, with the result of course, that there was all this havoc over baggage and everything like that. But they're looking at this. We're filling the flights, so we put on more. Have a look also at where they're competing. You know, competition is. This is something that is political related. I noticed the flights to Barcelona, Reus, Girona, and we've got 50 flights a week to those three airports. I noticed the flights for 2018 a little bit cheaper than they were in 2017. People were complaining about how expensive they were. Barcelona is a big hub for the cruise ships as well. Royal Caribbean do all their loading and Celebrity do all their loading in Barcelona. Most of the Irish joining cruises will go there. I suspect the Catalonian thing has taken a little bit of the market out of that. I would also have a look at what's happening price-wise, hotel-wise. The old Spanish model was the big tour operators like TUI bought all most of the hotel rooms in places like Mallorca, Ibiza places. They didn't come on the general market. You couldn't get them on the internet. That has changed. That's changing a little bit. The hoteliers are getting a little bit. They're worried that they were afraid of being stuck with a lot of unsold rooms. And when somebody comes and buys tens of thousands of rooms off you, you tend to sell them, and they were getting them very cheap. The price people were paying for hotel rooms that the middleman was paying for a hotel room could be as low as €13, and they were selling it on for about 80 or 90 then for that. So you can imagine it was a good business to be in. But when you had the buying power, as with anything, as with Tesco, if you have big buying power, you can actually dictate the terms. Hoteliers of Spain are escaping from the tyranny of the big tour operators. And if you look into websites such as Trivago.ie, a price comparison websites, you will find some of the hotels that are selling at even lower than they are on their own website. So that has been one of the big changes, is the way hotel rooms are being sold into the Irish market has changed, and the way that the prices, there's a lot of, and it's true, and I've said it myself on radio, that Spanish hoteliers are treating the end of the recession and the fact that Turkey is effectively closing down for business, not still there, but Tunisia and Egypt have closed down for business, and this displacement, it doesn't really matter if we used to send 115, 130, 120,000 Irish people used to go to Turkey every year. That's gone down to about 35, 40. But it doesn't really matter if 80,000 Irish stop going to Turkey. But if 15 million Germans stop going to Turkey, it becomes a big issue, and they're all going back to Spain. So the Spanish hoteliers have been treating this like it's Christmas, and prices have been shooting up, and they've been cancelling contracts to try and get more money wherever they can. Spanish hoteliers, like Irish hoteliers, not known for being generous. It's a very perishable product. You can't put it in the freezer and sell it on Monday if you don't sell your hotel room or your airline seat. So they do tend to jump at it. How have the Irish been reacting? Canary Islands is one of the worst places for price creep. The Irish have moved away from the beach. They don't really worry that much about their view of the beach if the price goes up by €20 and night. And we're exploring other areas. It's quite interesting to see a new route to Vigo, right beside Santiago de Compostela. Ryanair flying Dublin to Vigo. And what's happening there? They're just looking at what's happening with Santiago, the huge growth, the Camino, We're probably, somebody told me we're the third biggest group of walkers on the Camino are the Irish, even though we have a smaller population. It's just something grabbed the Irish imagination. We all want to do it. But Vigo appeared as a new route. Bilbao is gone 12 months, which it would always have been a seasonal route we have. So all these smaller Spanish airports are seeing Irish people as a new market, and you can get Asturias is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and you can get your meal there for 40% less than you pay for terrible stuff down in the Sun Costa resorts. So we're moving around Spain. The other thing that's happened in Spain is the fast trains. If you fly into Madrid, you're now in Malaga in 2 hours. You're now in the high-speed rail network. They put a lot of investment in. They're the second largest high-speed rail network in the world in terms of kilometres after China. And it's opened up all these little towns in Spain, little parts of Spain. Same thing in Portugal. Porto is a big entry point for Irish people now, growing. It's never going to be Faro, it's never going to be the Algarve, but some of those, a round of 2 beers, 4 coffees and food cost me €9.16. So in one of those little towns along the coast, the Atlantic coast, down in the Algarve it would be much more than that. And that stretch of coast between Lisbon and Porto, good place to look for to the theme of what we're looking at tonight. How to make your money travel farther, how to pay less for more. I'm going to throw it open to questions from the floor, so we can go anywhere in the world that you want to go, and I'll endeavour to answer all the questions. Final thing is that what I said at the beginning is looking for, if you've got competition on a route, it's the key to everything. And one of the transfer things that happened last year was Amsterdam became the new London. Amsterdam has 4 different airlines competing on it now. So that's unusual. Munich has 3. Once you have Ryanair up against Aer Lingus, and we have KLM on Amsterdam as well. So when you've got the smaller ones like ASL and aviation and people like that moving in to airports, you tend to see the prices shift. If you've got one carrier on an intercity route, they would basically charge what they like. People will remember paying a fortune to get Aer Lingus to Brussels. Once Ryanair used to always flew to Charleroi. It was too far out of Brussels for the business people. Once Ryanair went into Zaventem, the Aer Lingus prices tumbled. Same thing at Amsterdam. Aer Lingus had a free run on it for many years, and then Ryanair went into Amsterdam, and just out of high dudgeon, like egos in aviation are huge. They're as big as the A380s. The KLM decided to fly Dublin for no reason, just to peeve Michael O'Leary, and we now have 5 flights daily from KLM, plus 4 each from Aer Lingus. So it's good. Once you see a airline scrapping on a route, it's always good for the consumer. Any questions? Hey.
What's your opinion about America's short haul now? Does that mean price?
Yeah, it's both the price and the aircraft. The whole game changes. If you get a 737 or an A320 on an American route, the economics changes. The amount you can, smaller plane, you can charge less. The people who are working this very hard are the 2 Icelandic airlines, Icelandair and WOW, and they're beautifully positioned because they can reach places like Minneapolis, in a short haul flight from Keflavik, and they're putting. We have 2. We had WOW in Dublin, and some of their fares are about €100. They had a sale this week of €100 each way to North America. Big problem is that it's not a direct route, and at certain times of the year, WOW had a high connection. You start missing connections. And even though they'll house you in Reykjavik, if you miss your connection, they don't have the volume of flights. It's a little bit riskier than going direct. But the 2 reasons is that it's short haul. In time, if you're flying back from Boston to Ireland, you're with the wind behind you, you're going to be here in 5 hours, and that's not that different from Tenerife. So What has changed is the regulation, the ETOPS regulation, which didn't allow two-engined aircraft to fly the Atlantic. That has been changed because the technology has improved safety. The east coast of North America is now a short haul. It's a mind thing that's going to change among Irish people. They're going to be hopping over for weekends now. I mean, some of the kids are already doing that, you know. Yes, John.
Interesting tour de force around the world there. I just wanted to ask you about 2 tickets that I won from Turkish Airlines.
Yes.
Down to the Seychelles. Any recommendations where I should stay? Do I need a visa? How about yellow fever? Or maybe I shouldn't go?
Seychelles is expensive for hotel-wise, resort-wise. It's specialises in honeymoons. It's a series. There's a vast array of choices there. It's a series of islands. So getting to your actual resort can be a bit of a drama. You know, it's a smallish enough airport, and there's about, I think, 20 islands with resorts on them. It's wonderful, not full of variety. It tends to offer the boat trips, the whale watching, and all of that. The walks in the forest, the rainforest. It's marketed as largely honeymoon, and it does have a reputation of being a little bit expensive, but it is wonderful, and it's a real chill out place. If your hotel isn't covered in it, have a little look. It's quite interesting that a lot of the hotels are tied into tour operators, but just do a little bit of desktop research and have a look at first stop would be Trivago, because that gets the feed from each of the other people that do this business. But you may end up having a little ramble into Kira and Freedom Travel and see what you can do accommodation only in the Seychelles. It's an interesting place. It's but it is quite expensive. It does have a reputation of being expensive. My daughter did my daughter's training in hotel management. She's did her summer there last year, so she came home raving about it. And
I had a quick look on Trivago, and the hotels are ridiculously expensive.
Very expensive, yeah. The thing about because the Seychelles is so tied into tour operators, that the number of rooms that will land on the internet might be very small. They could have the entire hotel sold to the likes of a Hayes and Jarvis or something like that. I would put my nose into Kira and say, what can you do? Yeah. Because travel agents don't sell Dublin to Amsterdam, or because it makes no sense. Everyone buys them like they used to buy book tickets, but like to buy bus tickets. But when it gets longer, when it gets more complicated, some of the Trailfinders will send you a flight with 5 different individual parts to it. There's no way you could do that on the internet and get that guarantee that your bags will be brought through and all of that. So when it gets complicated and when it goes very far away, the travel agent can actually give you a better price on many occasions. Australia, Asia, start thinking. The Etihad and Emirates, all those Gulf carriers, put no discount for an internet booking. You get the same price of a travel agent. So it might be in the Seychelles would be an example of what I'm talking about. But it is ridiculously expensive for a long way. I mean, yeah. Some of the prices you hear people paying for you sort of say, well, you can go to cheaper places. In Thailand would be a good example, Malaysia would be a good example.
When you mentioned about independent travel agents, have they got a roll back now again, so in relation to travel?
Yeah, they're always, it's interesting that a lot of them went out of business. We had 500 travel agents in the country. We're now down to about 280. But what the ones that are there are doing is using the same tools that the airlines used. So what changed the travel agent in Ireland was the suppliers, not really the consumer. The suppliers, notably Ryanair, said, why are we paying 10% to these middlemen? Somebody invented a thing called the internet. And they weren't sure either. They had a call centre as well, just to be sure. And Michael O'Leary said in his usual understated manner, he'd never closed the call centre down. And then 18 months later, he just closed the call centre because the internet really worked for them. And they led the way and all the other airlines followed. The travel agent was then saying, hold on a moment, we can't sell airline tickets anymore. We can't get 10% off an airline ticket. It was very easy money for them. What are we going to have to do? We're going to have to work a bit harder. Cruise, honeymoon, niche products, and also added value. You know, if you've got a complicated itinerary, it's certainly worth going to a travel agent. If you've got a teenage daughter, hell hath no fury like a teenage daughter in the wrong place. So if you've got travel agents' advice is always worth. The other thing they did was they could go directly to hotels. There was, at one stage, you had 7 people between the hotelier and the holidaymaker. And some of them were on 1%, some were on 2%, some were on 15%. Like some of the big monsters like wilderness safaris in South Africa would charge 20% because they had marketing. They knew their way around England and Germany, and a small lodge owner in Kruger National Park wouldn't. So they take 20% of somebody's for doing virtually nothing. So what the internet did was connected all of those strands so that the travel agent can now directly go to hotels. And it created a whole new industry of bed banks and very spectacularly low-cost beds, which went down about 2 years ago. No, people weren't really aware of what bed banks were doing until one of them went bankrupt, and all these people arrived in their hotels and were told, oh, your bill hasn't been paid, you have to pay it again. Sorry, I paid it already on the internet. Oh, that's no use to me, I didn't get the money. So all of the internet created connections where there hadn't been before, which benefited the travel agent. But sadly, all the old ones who were operating basically on selling flight tickets, and 10% of a business class ticket to New York was a very good stipend at the time. They went bankrupt.
Travel agency as a group started making group bookings themselves.
A lot of them are. The difference between what a tour operator and a travel agent has melted away in my time. Travel agents are taking group bookings. Are taking sets of rooms in hotels and selling them on. And if you go to a hotelier with a set of with a room, you've got to remember a hotelier, if he's stuck with rooms and he wants to sell them for €14, he can't go on the internet and say, I'm selling my room for €14, because it'll just destroy his business model. What he does is he goes to a travel agent and says, this is the price I'm giving you for the room. Put it in with the airline ticket and the transfer, and nobody can tell the difference. Click and Go had packages, weekend packages in European cities, which cost less than the return flight from Aer Lingus, and Aer Lingus owned part of Click and Go. So Aer Lingus were obviously giving really cheap fares that were even cheaper than they would put on the internet to Click and Go to sell as a package. If you sell it as a package, it doesn't make you look bad. If you're selling stuff off for nothing, it does. And that's why the clever travel agents are still around, and some of them have grown. Click and Go was launched in 2009 in the middle of the recession, and has grown to a huge slice of the market. Cassidy Travel were very small. What they did was, when budget travel went down in 2009, went to all the places, the big ring of the M50, all those big shopping centres, and said, I'll take the budget travel place for you, because obviously budget were paying huge rates, and now they were available for much less. They grew, and Ciara, that I mentioned in Celbridge, Freedom, opened a little kiosk in Tesco and Naas. It's not even a shop. It's all it is a counter, and she's selling holidays out of that and the operating costs are a fraction of what you would pay in a main street. So the clever travel agents are using all the developments in aviation technology, pricing, distribution systems, all those changes to their advantage. The ones that aren't clever are just closed down.
Well, do you have a view on areas where there are political conflicts and the black spots, and what are diagnosis of that?
Yeah, I have very strong views on it. And people would have heard me say this before. 200 Irish people die every year abroad from things like the kayaking in Ecuador this week, or there are many drownings. There was a balcony fall this week as well. The number of people who die as a result of political conflict You can actually name them on one hand. And they go back to Tara Whelan back in 2005 in Turkey, was killed in a bombing with 3 who died in Sus. The post-mortems will be coming up next week. Lorna Carty from Meath and the 2 from Athlone. And then we had a girl from Palmerstown when she went to school in St. Joseph's who was on she was living in Perth and she died on the Malaysian aircraft that came down. So the number who die as a result of political conflict, which fills the headlines, and the government travel advisory says don't go here because it's conflict. The number is, it's tragic and it's horrible, but it's statistically, if you're thinking of this in terms of Cheltenham or something like that, statistically, the chances of being caught in conflict are so minute, they're off the scale. Whereas what kills Irish people abroad is road accidents, drownings, and very often the heart conditions we pack in our suitcases when we bring them with us. And 200 of us are dying abroad every year. It's not making the headlines. It wouldn't. Is it enough to worry about? Yes. If you're bringing family, would you put yourself, family, in a situation unnecessarily? Of course, you think of all these things, but is it really enough to stop people's travel plans? I don't think so.
In that context, when you spoke at the outset with regard to Irish people wanting to do a little bit different than the norm in areas like that.
Sunway told me that the day after the bombing in Bali, they got more than one phone call saying, are there any bargains in Bali? Because that's what tends to happen. The price, everybody cancels their holiday and the Irish are saying, let's go there. And, those of us who are old enough to remember the Northern Ireland conflict, were trying to persuade people to come to Ireland because they were looking at this on television saying, I can't go there. I saw there's bombs going off every night. And you sort of said, come, it's great. And everybody, tourists don't tend, you don't tend to end up at a rally in the Tunisia or, the Costa Rica situation at the moment, or, you tend not to be in the... I was a news journalist, and my job was to find the hotspots. I had fierce trouble finding it. Like you're actually you're chasing where the bomb is or where the rally is. I spent most of 1994 in South Africa trying to cover a messy, nasty conflict between Inkatha and spurred on by the apartheid government and ANC. So you're looking for trouble, and it's very hard to find it. So a tourist is certainly not going to. I mean, what happened in Sus was so far off the scale that it made everyone sit back and think, and it was just it was a big. It looked to me like a big lapse in local security, and we did have a previous target in our cruise ship, an MSC cruise ship group in Tunisia, and we had a bomb deliberately aimed at tourists in Istanbul. So it does happen, and every time you say what I'm just saying, everyone will say, well, you're being irresponsible, as one of these radio people said once. You're just being irresponsible telling people to travel. The point I'd make is, who wins if we change our travel plans? Given the statistical chance being so small, should it affect anything to do with our travel plans? I'd have no hesitation bringing my own children to Kenya, and there are people saying don't go to Kenya at the moment, but I know exactly what happens. You fly into Nairobi, you're on the road to the Masai Mara, you have this amazing time out with the animals, and if there's a rally not even in Nairobi, they tend to be in the west of the country where there are no tourists. They tend to be in the towns.
Just on that point, with regards to safaris, where in Africa would you go?
Sorry?
With regards to safaris, where in Africa would you go?
Entry first safari, Kenya, a little bit cheaper than Tanzania. The most amazing animals, and they're real safari, not what you get in South Africa. It's the best value for money. The best safari is the most expensive. Botswana, it's ridiculously expensive. Makes the Seychelles look like Aldi, John. And the reason it's ridiculously expensive is they have this amazing eco-management thing where they only allow small numbers of tourists in, and you go to the Okavango Delta, and it's one of the most amazing things. But I would say The Samburu in the north of the country is slightly cheaper than the Masai Mara, but go into the Masai Mara. And if your doctor tells you you have 10 days to live and you've only got one chance to do something, safari is the thing to do. It is wonderful. It won't be there forever either, because you can only you're bringing tourists over a very fragile landscape. And I can see eventually that'll have to come to an end. We have huge problems. I mean, there's a big, it's a bigger debate than we can tackle here tonight. The side of the debate that I sometimes get controversially enter into is that tourism is helping sustain the communities, the local communities, and the economics of saving the environment. But the downside of it is that you have situations where you've maybe one line and 400 Land Rovers around them in some of these places, and it's not good, you know. It's just too many people going into a fragile environment. But to answer your question, Kenya, KLM through Amsterdam is the preferred route down. All of the high-end tour companies like Hayes and Jarvis have a big expansion into Ireland at the moment, and I think they're discounting their high-end holidays to try and they've a target of selling 3,000 holidays out of Ireland this year. I suspect that they will do that by discounting, because it's basically their first year in the market, but all of them will have good Kenya programs, and Kuoni is probably the biggest and the most famous of them. So.
Going back to the airlines in North America, we're going to Los Angeles with Ethiopian.
Yes, great service, and it's really amazing service, and the newest aircraft.
But what I wasn't sure is, do we clear customs in Dublin or?
Oddly enough, you clear customs in LAX.
And is that a disadvantage?
It depends. It has its moments when, depending on the number of aircraft are landing at the same time in LAX.
Yeah.
The clearing customs in Dublin is a great thing, but it costs €40 per passenger, and Ethiopian decided not to pay it. And that means they're putting in some cases you're paying €200 each way less on Los Angeles than for Ethiopian than Aer Lingus. And for those of a certain age, again, this is a generational thing, Ethiopia meant sort of Live Aid and Bob Geldof to some of us. But you're dealing with the newest, with a Dreamliner, the newest aircraft in the world. They've a new modern fleet, and they have a terrific level of standard of care and wonderful staff, really wonderful. Really, really great. And Ethiopia, the other direction, is very interesting. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia is a beautiful country, one of the most beautiful I've ever been in. Lalibela looks like it's a Christian country surrounded by Muslims, like it was isolated since the Queen of Sheba's time almost, you know. And you've got a little monastery with stone churches in Lalibela, which looks like Glendalough, except it's still operating, and a priest with a long beard comes out with a cross and you do your little pilgrimage. It's just fantastic country. But flying on to Cape Town with Ethiopian costs less than getting off in Addis Ababa. And back to, this makes no sense whatsoever, back to what I said earlier, competition is what does it. There's a big competition on that Cape Town route, particularly from Turkish, and Ethiopian will fly you to Addis Ababa and charge you a bit more, because they know they've got the Addis Ababa is the capital of Africa. It's where they organise the African Union headquarters are, and there's a lot of aid organisations and United Nations. So they know they've those guys, and they can charge what they like. Whereas Cape Town, they're competing, and it's cheaper to fly to Cape Town, to fly to Addis and onto Cape Town than it is to get off in Addis. I said to the Ethiopian guys, why don't I get off in Addis? I'd buy the Cape Town, get off in Addis, and he said, we'll catch you with the visa. We know when you look for the Ethiopian visa, you're getting off. But that's it's a crazy industry. Air France will sell, or even BA will sell a ticket from Dublin to London to New York in Ireland cheaper than directly from London to New York. They do that because they don't want, when they've got seats, the phrase they use, the eloquent phrase they use is they dump the seats. When they want to dump seats, they won't do it in their own market because it'll affect them. But if they do it in Aer Lingus's market, it affects Aer Lingus. So Air France do the same. And the people who do it most effectively now are Aer Lingus. People are flying to London through Dublin because Aer Lingus are able to, because what Aer Lingus did in Willie Walsh's time was got the cost base down. You know, they got the number of employees down from over 6,000 to about 1,700. I mean, it was grossly overstaffed. Some people remember why. Every politician in North Dublin, when he wanted a vote, promised to get the son or the daughter into Aer Lingus. So we had this huge airline, a bit like Alitalia is now, with too many staff. So he got the cost base down, and now Aer Lingus can undercut anyone. They're very, very, they would say, there was a big, it was a chart of low cost, long haul low cost brought out last week. Norwegian was ranked as the most effective, and AirAsia X, Tony Fernandez, based out of Singapore, an Irish guy, Conor McCarthy, who'd come from Ryanair, helped Tony Fernandez set that up. You can see the Ryanair formula is really highly regarded internationally. Every airline wants to follow it. But Aer Lingus would say we are also in the low-cost, long-haul business, so we can do it cheaper. Where that bounces back in the faces of us as Irish consumers is that more than half of the seats on an Aer Lingus transatlantic in winter is not going to be by Irish people or American people. They're people flying from Paris to Dublin. So in a way, it's made our flights more expensive on the pure supply and demand thing. But the upside of it is it's made routes like Miami, which launched last September, and Seattle, which is launching in April, and Philadelphia, which is launching in March. It made them viable where they never would have been before, and increased our choice. So it swings and roundabouts. We gain a little bit, we lose a bit. But always bear in mind, when you're flying Dublin, New York, think indirect. You know, if you've got a family of 4 or 5, you're not going to be doing that. But if you've got, a gang of lads going over for the weekend for a match or something, it's certainly worth their while going the longer way to get the shorter, better fare, You can save 130, 150 euro going indirect. But I would, back to your question, no hesitation recommending that Ethiopian service. It's an amazing service to Los Angeles. The one disadvantage is you don't pre-clear in Dublin. Yay.
So when you turn on your PC and you want to travel, where would you go? Trivago, Google?
The aggregated site that has everything on it hasn't really been invented yet. Whoever does will win. Google has been trying for 4 years with Google Flights. We all thought it might wipe out the evil empires, Booking.com. They have all the hotel rooms. I have no hesitation recommending Trivago of the aggregator sites for hotels. And then there are a couple of them for flights that have most of the airlines on. But Flight Scanner, people like that, Skyscanner. But the thing is that when you go to when you find a price, I'm always advising people to hesitate and go back to the original airline. And let's face it, Skyscanner won't put Ryanair up front. You'll always get a cheaper flight from Ryanair, and Aer Lingus sometimes will. When you go in, you're told, oh, this is the lowest fare. And when you go onto the Aer Lingus and the Ryanair sites, you find even lower. And that applies with anywhere where you have an airline with an unusual relationship with the aggregators, which both Aer Lingus and Sky. Aer Lingus don't have their the databases that everyone is feeding off are the same databases. And if one of the airlines isn't putting into that database, the GDSs, the Amadeus, Sabre, and Travel Report that rule the world, there are 3 of them that rule the world. Ryanair just pulled off Amadeus. So that means that any of those sites feeding off the Amadeus feed won't have a Ryanair flight on it. And there's, like all business, there's big egos, and Clint Eastwood, go on, make my day stuff going on. Amadeus says, we're more important to you than you are to us, because we have 90% of the market in Germany and you're trying to expand in Germany. And Michael O'Leary tells them to go and so off and storms out of the room, and I don't need you. So this happens every year. Then at the end of the year they got back together again and they have another. But the point I'm making is that there's 4 or 5 databases everyone's feeding from. So to answer your question, is there one that has everything, all the information? No. Is that likely to happen? Probably not. The egos are too big. The business arrangements are, the cost of, airlines are always complaining that the databases are charging too much. And then they say, well, I don't need you. The Ryanair line is, we actually get more hits on our website than Booking.com gets on theirs. So that's their logic, is why would we give our inventory to somebody when and get charged for it when we can do it all on our own? So advice, go to Trivago as a good aggregator for hotel rooms. Go to there are three major players in the air. Skyscanner's biggest, and go back to the airline website and go back to the hotel website. And then, if you still don't like your price, pick up the phone, give the hotel in the West a ring and say, the cheapest I can get is €88. Can you give it to me for 80? And they'll say, okay, I have 12 rooms empty tonight. Yes. That's how it works, and as the night goes on, and it's basically, Spencer Hill horse fair is what we're doing here. If you can't put your airline seat or your hotel bed in the freezer and sell it on Monday, it's gone. The hoteliers hate that, by the way. They hate me saying that, but it's if you're looking for your price, bear in mind, you've got. When we grew up, when I went to this little school here, travel agents had all the information and all the tickets. We knew nothing. We absolutely knew nothing. We knew nothing how it worked. Now what the internet has done has meant, first of all, we got the information, and then we got access to the tickets. And that has put the consumer in a position of power which is unprecedented across history and even across industries. There's no industry, I would argue here, where we have as much power and information as we have in travel. And particularly in this country, we've been very savvy about how we use that. When you're buying car insurance or anything like that, they can still whack you with the jargon. They can still produce a few things to scare you and get you to pay more than you should. But in travel, we've got very good at it. Very important, I didn't mention car insurance. The last refuge of the Del Boys in travel is car hire. When you arrive, having booked your car, they start producing all of these things to sell up. And the reason is that they're paid a pittance, particularly in America. Almost all their income is made by selling extras. So you're told that your insurance is no good. Yeah, your crash waiver, and there's 18 people have died on that highway last year, and you'll have to pay the first $2,000, and for an extra $40 now I can sell you. So you end up going through the equivalent of the Grand National, Beecher's Brook, twice, to try and tell them, I've paid for the insurance, I've paid for everything. It's okay, I just want the car, let me out of here. And even, I'd regard myself as an experienced traveller, and then I got my credit card bill, and they'd managed to get me to check one of the boxes that I thought I hadn't checked, and stuck another $60 or something on. It is a terrible, terrible experience for someone who's great. We're all good at our jobs. A farmer, who's great at getting the best grain price, arrives in Miami airport. He's out of his league. He's out of his depth to this guy who does it for a living. And they all the number of people who get caught is shocking. And there's no way of policing it. So all I can say is the cheapest way of getting the extra insurance, the waivers are one of the things. Terms and conditions on travel on the car hire are terrible. The cheapest way to get your waiver cover, or the first 100, it can be $2,000 of the first if you've collision. The cheapest way is to buy an annual policy or to buy a 2-week policy from one of these people who sell specifically that insurance, and not to buy it at the counter. Try and buy as little at the counter as possible. And
how do you get away with it? Like you said yourself, how do you
I was going through the form, but he stuck a little. The way there's 18 boxes, Booking a Ryanair flight used to be like that. It used to be 17 clicks, no. So somewhere along the way, after a yes turned into a no, or a no turned into a yes.
We were caught one time like that where Mel was going mad because she said she got the insurance and
Yeah,
you didn't tick the box,
yeah,
and we were tired after travelling to
that's
Boston.
right. You're,
Exactly.
And so we ended up paying now $90 or something
Yeah.
extra. But when we went out, it was we had booked a 7-seater because there was a few of us, the family and all that, and it was a 5-seater. So I was furious at this stage. I went back in and I said, you know, what's the story? I said, one box we had ticked. And she looked at me, she knew I was upset, and she came out with the keys, and they got the biggest shock ever that ever got.
yeah.
So we got something out of it.
Yeah, I think we sometimes do well. Sometimes you can get a bigger car or something like that just with the Irish accent. It happened to me many years ago.
Is there any advantage to using your Visa card booking holidays?
Yeah, it covers you've coverage under your Visa card, and it's it gives you you do get coverage in the case of bankruptcy or hotel closing down that wouldn't be available otherwise. You know, it's if you book with a travel agent, the bonding gives you the same coverage. By the way, let's say your holiday. That's happened with Monarch in September. The airline just folded. Once you're booked, if you booked with Monarch directly, there was nothing you could do. Whereas if you booked with a travel agent or indeed on your credit card, you were now entitled to be flown home. And if you booked in advance, you were entitled to your money back. So it does give you that cover.
Are you distinguishing between Visa card and credit card?
No, most of the credit cards have. I think there are exceptions to what I'm saying. I think American Express and Diners Club have a different level of cover, and it's quite confusing. But the main consumer credit cards, including the ones done by, including the branded ones, I think are generally covered. But don't hold me to every single one of them. It's
Could be credit and debit?
no, debit is different. It's a different game, and it's credit. And the credit card legislation is changing dramatically this year as well. So the biggest impact for buying holidays is that this extra credit card charge that you have to pay is now going to be illegal. So when you say, oh yeah, if you pay in cash, it's such a price. If you pay credit card, it costs you €6. The revenue commissioners use it for, they charge you extra for 1.1% credit card charge for paying your property tax online or whatever. But the legislation to change that is coming in very quickly. I think it's coming in sometime in May, and that will make. I don't know what will happen. I know exactly what will happen. Michael O'Leary will find another charge and put it on your ticket anyway. But that's the,
Just a quick story with regards to travel agents and flying. We coming from South Africa, we were talking about British Airlines.
Yeah.
To move Cape Town, and it was June 2016. We booked through Trailfinders. There was no big difference between the internet price for the airline and Trailfinders, and we were stopping over on the way back for 3 days in Istanbul when things went a bit scary. So the whole airport was closed. There was not.
You were caught by that. Okay, cool. Yeah.
So there was not a single Turkish Airlines employee in sight.
That's right. They fled from the desks. They fled from the information desks and left.
There was nobody. So
20,000 people in the airport.
guys here in Dublin, and they booked us on the next flight out. So it's sometimes handy to have.
Yeah. The good travel agents are the ones that are on the end of the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're out with these guys and they get a phone call, somebody's missed a connection.
Yeah.
They have the phone numbers on their phone to get it sorted, whereas someone in an airport that was a terrible night in Istanbul because there was no information available. People were ringing me from Istanbul and I was in Barcelona to know what was happening. And it was very, very interesting. Like the Turkish Airlines guys weren't returning calls, and then about 6 o'clock in the morning they all started returning the call. And I think what happened was basically they were waiting to see who won before they decided which side to back.
It was. We were just next to the mosque there, just off the square there. So
in the old city, the Blue Mosque.
Yeah. So,
It's a beautiful city, and
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. And prices, one of the good things, like I said about Bali, one of the good things about a bit of political turmoil is it brings the prices down.
Yeah, but there was virtually no tourists.
Yeah. And Turkish fly there twice a day. It's interesting that down the southeast, which was a big playground for Irish holidaymakers, there's only one an Izmir flight this year, whereas there used to be 6 a week, down to. But there's still, the loyal people are still going down there. But places like Antalya, you beautiful, beautiful hotel developments and really high standard hotels. And you were getting them for sale for the last 2 years. I gather the prices have started creeping up again because the Russian market has moved back in. All good? Any more questions? Come to the holiday show. We've 3 days of 4 of 17 back-to-back sessions like this over the 3 days. So I think Tom and Sheila have been. So come along, and if you have any more questions, that we do that.
Could I ask one thing before?
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned e-visas.
Yes.
We did a trip fairly recently, and one of the things we found is e-visas can be very, very expensive.
Yes.
We went into Turkey and it cost us €35 each, the
Yeah.
e-visas for there. We went into India and it was €115 for e-visas. So it actually can add considerably to the cost of the trip.
Absolutely. And the smaller and the more obscure the country, the more they charge for the visa. It's seen as a big source of revenue for poorer countries, third world countries. Yeah. The Vietnamese one is 100.
Can you still get the visas in the ordinary sense? Or do you have to use e-visas?
Apparently, Turkey is an example. They said no, absolutely not. But people have. But it's something I wouldn't recommend. And I'll tell you why. If an airline flies you into a country with the incorrect paperwork, the airline gets fined a colossal amount of money. So your argument isn't with the immigration officer. Very often, if you have an argument with the immigration officer, you can persuade them, to let you in, usually with a few bob or something like that. But your argument is with the check-in person. They won't let you on the aircraft, and you forfeit the flight, and that's a disaster. And you mentioned South Africa. One of the biggest, most unexpected disasters is when you arrive at the check-in and you don't have a full blank page on your passport. You won't be let on the flight to South Africa. You have to have a blank page in the passport. It doesn't say that anywhere in any of the rules and regulations, but it's happened. People have flown, to Amsterdam, for instance, and have to return from Amsterdam because they don't have a blank page in the passport. There's little tripwires everywhere. Like, travelling the world has got so much easier, but there's still a couple of tripwires to remind us how it comes. Great. Okay.
So just before we go then, I think we've all been somewhat amazed at the depth of knowledge of Eoghan this evening, and as John said, we certainly did a world tour. And I suppose one of the objectives of us here in the Ardclough Visitor Centre this year was just to let you know that this is available as it's available for the community. It's a community facility. So I think I'm very grateful that Eoghan helped us to do that this evening. We have a few more events organised, such as this, before the year end. We won't do it too often, but I think in the next couple of months before the break-up, we might have some more talks. We actually have Patty Sheridan organised, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks' time. We'll kind of let you know when on the final date, but she's agreed anyway to come and speak to us. And we might do 1 or 2 before the break then for the summer, and maybe a few in the autumn as well. But we'd really welcome feedback from you. If anybody would like to volunteer, please let us know. We'd be only too delighted, if there are any volunteers, or if you know of anybody that you think would be very good for an evening like this, please let us know as well. And Wednesday evening we are open to ideas about what evenings we should have it. So it's Wednesday evening, okay, in general way or terms. Yeah. Just to say a little bit then, we have quite a few other activities here for this year. We've developed a Heritage Centre actually, and John Phelan has been doing an awful lot of work on that. So we've got a grant on the Town and Village Renewal Scheme. So that's kind of up and running. We'd hope to have that running before the end of the year. We're also in the process of opening a preschool for children with autism. That's going through the Kildare County Council planning application at the moment, and we also hope to have that up and running, shortly. Planning permission, being granted, I suppose. I suppose the other thing I would just like to say is that we're delighted that Tony Carton is coming to join us from the 1st of February, so I think he will be a great addition. So we're looking forward to that. And just finally then, your support is really important for a facility like this, so we're grateful that there's been such a good turnout this evening. Also, we're relying on grants for the county council and so forth, so if you're ever talking to your local politician or county councillor, please keep us in mind as well. And just finally then, obviously a place like this, there is a fair amount of money involved in running it and so forth, so any financial contributions would be very welcome, and in that context, we've left a little box on the way out, so if you would like to make a contribution, it would be very welcome, but if you've forgotten your wallet, that is absolutely no problem. I think everybody is a local, but for those that are not, the J Club is next door. They have a very nice bar there, so it's literally a walk away, so I think if you would like to return, I think they would be very glad to see you. So I would just like to finish by really thanking Eoghan really for a tremendous evening, I think. And if you could just join hands, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you.